And now, at long last, this day has come. Now with this bill, the voice of justice speaks again.
For we have been called to an indescribably significant responsibility, and that is to save the soul of America.
There are numerous ties to NAREB during the process and the course of the movement. And we were on the right side, on the right page, at the right time to help influence the passage of that bill.
This is the story we know about 1968, one of the most consequential years in American history. The civil rights movement was live and in black and white. The Congress debated a fair housing bill, but after years, it was still stalled. In 1968, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers was 21 years old. This group of men and women founded NAREB in Tampa, Florida in 1947 because African Americans were not allowed in the mainstream real estate group.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you.
We have information that King has been shot at the Lorraine. Back then, he has been shot.
Okay, TAC 10 advising King has been shot, 604.
In 1968, gunfire silences forever the face, voice, and heart of the movement, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
The cemetery is too small for his spirit, but we commit his body to the ground. The grave is too narrow for his soul, but we commit his body to the ground.
Just 1 week later, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 becomes law. That's the story we know. What the history books don't show is that when it came to that momentous law, when it came even to Dr. King, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers was there, beside, and in front, leading the way.
The reason why we were organized in Tampa, Florida in 1947 was because of discrimination. And discrimination came from the National Association of Realtors. They denied membership to all black agents and brokers. So from that day to this day, we have pledged and support democracy in housing. It is very important that while we're here in North Carolina today,
to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's tragic death, NAREB's past president, Bernie Jackson, and Ray Carlisle, president of the NAREB Investment Division, NID, sat down with the Meshaw brothers of Durham, North Carolina.
Both Meshaws have been past attorneys for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, and their father was a pioneer charter member. We had the founding members, and then right after that he became a member. Meshaw Sr. was an activist in the 30s in several organizations, so it's in your DNA.
When I came back to Durham and went to work in the businesses, the very first thing he said was, the money out of your first paycheck, goes for dues to NAREB. I said, who's NAREB?
Henry Mickey Mishaw Jr. is currently the longest-serving member of the North Carolina General Assembly. Eric Mishaw was one of the first black students at Duke Law School and worked to integrate the North Carolina Bar Association.
Nobody really visualized the danger because the movement was far more important than any danger that could come about.
Real estate business owners like their father, and both NAREB leaders at the time, Mickey Mishaw was a part of a NAREB team who actually testified before Congress, urging passage of the National Housing Act.
Started out with separate but equal was unconstitutional, no longer the law of the land. Then you got public accommodations, then you got voting rights. The last place you had to go was housing, which would have been the linchpin for all of those things that happened. And we, as the only black trade organization in the country, played a significant role in that being done.
NAREB recently obtained documents of its members' Senate committee testimony before such venerable political surnames as Kennedy, Bye, and Mondale. NAREB president at the time, Q.V. Williamson, along with other NAREB leaders, testified twice in 1966 and 1967. Williamson telling the Senate committee in 1966 how disheartening it is to note that a citizen of another country can come to America and purchase dwellings that a Negro cannot buy. It matters not that he has the money to purchase, the color of his skin keeps him out.
There wasn't anybody in there who pulled any punches on anything, even the members of the Senate. We felt that we were beginning to get across to people the need for fair housing legislation.
Mickey Mishaw and others testified in 1967. Responding to a senator's question about the legislation possibly disarming militant blacks, Mickey Mishaw said, "Instead of using the militant Negro, let's turn it around and say, how would this affect the militant white? I see a very dark road unless we can reestablish the faith we once had in the government of the United States."
The fact was that white folks began to realize that when they moved out of the cities to the suburbs and took the city services with them to the suburbs, that they had left the inner cities where those services were coming from to black folks. If black folks got angry, they cut off their services. I think, if you want to know the truth, I think that was the singular most testimony that they could have gotten to make sure that that bill passed. And that came from NAREB.
Even going back to its founding in 1947, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers has long been in the fight, prodding U.S. policymakers to open the door for African Americans in housing. More documents NAREB obtained, this time from the Presidential Archives, show NAREB established connections with the Lyndon Johnson White House well before its Senate testimony. Here, NAREB offers condolences upon the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. NAREB condemns the Johnson administration with this resolution charging discriminatory practices and completely overlooking an opportunity to utilize America's qualified, competent Negroes in HUD's Agency for International Development. NAREB also praised the president.
A distinguished audience of civil rights leaders, congressmen, and friends attend the ceremonies that install Robert C. Weaver as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
NAREB commends President Johnson after his appointment of Robert Weaver, America's first Housing and Urban Development Secretary and first African-American cabinet member. In fact, NAREB's activism helped create the Department of HUD. And as the Mishaw brothers told Jackson and Carlisle, NAREB's connections internally helped to bring about Weaver's appointment.
NAREB has sent a lot of letters of support for the appointment of Bob Weaver and other programs that the White House was promoting. So if you had an inside operator saying that they're doing this for you, you owe them something, then it would work that way.
NAREB then continued to establish dialogue with Weaver and every HUD secretary afterwards. They came and continued to come to NAREB conferences and conventions.
The culprit is a Congress, is the recalcitrance of white society, the vacillation and ambivalence of white America on the whole question of genuine equality for the black man.
Perhaps little known about NAREB and the movement is the close ties Dr. King had with NAREB.
He was president at the time. I said, I've already spoken to Martin about coming here. I said, why don't you just extend the invitation as president of the body? He said, well, didn't you just do that?
At Mickey Meshaw's invitation, Dr. King is the keynote speaker at NAREB's 20th convention in San Francisco in 1967. Meshaw introduced him.
We've got to condemn riots, but as we condemn them, we must be just as forthright in condemning the conditions that bring them into being and condemning the Congress of our nation, which can spend $80 million a day to fight a war which I consider an unjust one in Vietnam, and yet cannot even or refuses to pass a $44 million bill to get rid of the rats in the ghettos.
It was the Meshaws who provided NAREB's close connection to Dr. Martin Luther King, who had joined a protest in their hometown, Durham.
We had dinner with Martin in our home. He loved Mom's greens. He loved her fried fish. Any time he came, that's where he stayed. Because he couldn't stay at that time in any hotel.
What most folks don't know is at the time he was assassinated, he was due in North Carolina. That weekend, Martin called and said, look, I've got to go back to Memphis. We've got run into some problems there. Tell Mom that dinner's off, that what we'll try to do is set it up for next weekend, and I will be sure to make it at that point. And then, of course, you know what happened after that.
And so on this 50th anniversary, NAREB reclaims its pivotal role in the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights Movement.
It wasn't until 1987, during my presidency, that we had the opportunity to work tirelessly on the amendment, the Fair Housing Amendment Act of 1987. It was NAREB who was the driving force, and ultimately, through our testimony, through our intense advocating, we were able to be the paramount group on the point of the passing of the 1987 Fair Housing Amendment Act, which finally gave the 1968 Fair Housing Act its teeth.
The obstacles pre-1968 for African Americans was that you had laws and restrictions on the books that restricted where people could live. And so through the Fair Housing Act, many of those obstacles was knocked down to give African Americans the opportunity to live where they so chose.
A positive outcome of the Fair Housing Act, whites abandoned these cities throughout this country, abandoned the urban core. And as a result of that, that meant contractual opportunities are now much greater for blacks in these cities where blacks control the city's power structure.
That was the great equalizer. It brought about a major change within the industry. I'll give you an example, boards and commissions. So when we are able to serve on those particular boards, that brought about the changing of housing policies.
Still, NAREB leaders say, true fair housing remains elusive for African Americans, with obstacles like the housing recession, outdated credit scoring, gentrification, and affordability erasing gains and threatening to turn back the clock.
Of course, everything that was contrary to equal treatment in fair housing programs on a local and national level were not equally available to black folk. Of course, we had to go to battle, literally, in the marketplace and in courts.
That argument of fair housing and passing the laws didn't make a lot of difference. It's very, very, very much necessary. But why is the black home ownership rate the same as it was 50 years ago, 42%?
You would think when that bill was passed and the spirit of the bill and the intent of the bill that home ownership for African Americans would be well over 50% in this country. We've never achieved that, and we're declining.
But the type of discrimination that I see is the biggest issue today, that our neighborhoods in this country are becoming increasingly economically segregated. And it really revolves around the issue of affordability.
Because it's not easy to buy, in the city anymore. So that's really where the problem is. Until the market just flatten out some, it's really a problem,
Constant battle. I even remember during my presidency with NAREB, there was a bill that they were trying to pass, it's a Johnson-Crapo bill, and it was to eliminate Fannie and Freddie. Yeah, and that's what we use as African American. That's the type of financing that we typically use. Then what would we have if we didn't have Fannie and Freddie?
It was a game changer as much as America would allow it to be, because today our organization, the Realtist organization, is still effectively fighting for fair housing.
I think at this point in time, fair housing, like I said, is very noble, and it's something that had to come to pass. I think there will always be those who will create stumbling blocks, but then there are those of us who are strong, and we'll always walk over them, jump over them, hurdle them. Whatever we have to do, we'll do it in order to get the job done.
We have to be guarded because they are still going to be occurring today with no regards to the outcome. And I think it's just the idea of the people that are in control is going to always do what they want to do. It takes those of us who's not in control to make sure that our voices will always be heard and that we will always remain our own spokesperson.
And that's what's so phenomenal about the Realtists, because we were there out front getting hit like the birds in V formation flying. We were out front hitting the pavement.
So we have impacted the whole country in helping those who are disenfranchised, who are hurting. We have become counselors, we have held their hands. We have become almost everything to the people in our communities today. And that's what we do. That's what we have done for years.